For issues in Minnesota water quality, it's worthwhile to have a look at this. I was on the Headwaters Council, which was a group of people that were to provide something of oversight to the staff and the task forces. And I just want to quickly read to you 4 conclusions from this section on water quality from the standpoint of land and water. Comprehensive land use and water planning, framework within 5 years, integrate sustainability and land use permitting within 5 years, increase local enforcement and compliance capacity, 5 years, monitor effectiveness, 10 years. Now, the point of all that is not that those were the ideas that Warren and I were moving forward. We were dragging our feet, I think, on a whole bunch of things. It did keep some things out of there that were negative, and I think certainly not necessarily very productive. The purpose of that document was not to provide a water plan for the state, but to provide a framework for the legislative committee, which presumably would do the water planning. One of the things that I think is of value in getting involved in sessions like that is that for most of the people in the state of Minnesota, and certainly for those involved not only in doing the staff work, but also in providing the inputs, when they think of water in Minnesota, they think of lakes, and they think of whether or not there's going to be enough water for manufacturing and industry in the state. Only secondary and thirdly do they think of water for agriculture. And one of the points that we were trying to make very heavily is that from the standpoint of agriculture, a big issue for water in Minnesota is what are we going to do with excess and surplus water, whether it's southern Minnesota, western Minnesota, River Valley, or whatever. Though that's an important water issue for the state, and I think it would have been useful had it been given more attention. Well, so much for that. I'm going to introduce our final speaker, Dan Baloun, who is a state conservationist for the National Resource Conservation Service. He's been in Minnesota since 2010, not terribly long. In the past, he was the assistant staff conservationist in Wisconsin. Before that, he'd been in Iowa. He has been involved in a significant amount of planning by NRCS as the assistant commissioner, the assistant conservationist in Wisconsin. He developed and implemented the Farm Bill easement program for Wisconsin. His topic, working with farmers to address turbidity. Ron?
Okay, well, I want to thank the Ag and Water Resources Council for the invite. Great to be here, and it's really, really great to see the turnout. How many farmers? Raise your hand. That's really good to see. Thanks for coming. Warren asked me to try to do a wrap-up. Everything that we heard today, what does it mean? What can farmers do? What can private landowners do about turbidity? How many people here are as confused as I am? Perfect. I think it's safe to say if the solution was easy, we would have found it a long time ago. This is not there's not an easy fix. There's not a silver bullet. There might be silver pellets in a shotgun cell, though. There might be little pieces that we can do. We looked at what Drew talked about. 60% of the sediment, plus or minus, could be higher, could be lower, is coming from the stream banks or bluffs, right? So as an ag producer, what are you going to do about that? Not much, right? When you looked at the size of some of those bluffs, arguably Mother Nature and the river is going to decide oftentimes how much of that's going to move and when it's going to move. Dr. Seeley talked a lot about temperature increases, climate, what we're seeing, how precip is having an impact. Again, what can we do about that in ag? We're going to live with what Mother Nature gives us as we have for years. We will continue to do that. He talked quite a bit about the rapid breakdown of residue, or at least he mentioned it, which got my ear, and I'll talk about it a little later. And of course, he hinted at if we're going to have these major events, or a lot of the precipitation is coming in more of these thunderstorms, or one or two events. And that really correlates with what Tim Raditz and what Wisconsin Discovery Farms are finding. A lot of the damage is happening in one or two events, not consistently throughout the season, and we saw that more and more throughout the year. Dr. Fox talked a lot about conservation practices, and he said something which I love to hear. The right practice in the right spot works. We know that. The challenge is to put the right practice in the right spot. He also mentioned something which was really, I've been talking about a little bit as I came from Wisconsin. We had the buffer initiative. We can mandate 50-foot buffers along all the stream banks, along all the rivers. But he talked about concentrated flow. And if we have concentrated flow, the 50-foot buffer is worthless where the concentrated flow blows through it. So when we talk about what we're asking our ag producers to do, if we're asking them to take that area out of production and put a 50-foot buffer there, oftentimes we're asking them to do what? Take some of the most valued cropland they have on the farm and take it out of production. Knowing that, the science would tell us that area, that grass is going to be ineffective for water quality, if that's the purpose. If the purpose is for pheasants and pheasant hunting, by all means, put the buffer there. So we have to remember that as we think about programs. Dr. Trimble, enormous decrease in soil erosion. We've seen from 1900s, early 1900s, talked about a watershed which I know and love. It's the most studied watershed in the world, probably Coon Creek. We can tell that we are doing the right thing. So the message that we just heard from Larry, agriculture should not take a back seat to anybody. We have done some great things, and we are continuing to do good things. Our problem, and it's largely because most of ag is we tend to be quiet. We tend not to blow our horn enough. We tend not to speak as loud as we should about what we are doing and what we are doing well. We need to think about stopping that behavior. We need to speak more and more loudly about the things that are happening and the things that we're doing right. Sediment moving within our streams is really maybe not directly correlated to upland erosion. We talked about that. Again, that correlation of when we look at no-till, we look at strip-till, we look at the practices that our producers are doing from a standpoint of cropping, we are doing some things very well. We've learned some good lessons. A moldboard plow is probably not a good thing in certain situations. We figured that out, and we're doing it well. Historical sediments, talked about that. We know we have streams and rivers which are loaded with sediments. They're moving, as these events happen, through this watershed and into eventually the receiving body of water. That is probably not going to stop. Those sediments are there, they are going to move. We heard a lot about that, and Dr. Sands mentioned it a little bit as well. Dr. Gupta, tile drainage is not increasing the flow. He's not seeing the impact where we're saying, okay, if we decide that we're going to tile Minnesota, we're going to increase and we're going to tile will become a major part of the problem we're seeing with sedimentation or turbidity in Lake Pepin. I'll pick on Lake Pepin. Probably not a true statement from the science that we're seeing. But yet, sometimes that does make the paper and does make the media. Tile is the problem. Dr. Sands, we don't know how ag drainage affects hydrology and stream flow. We really don't know. We're learning, and there's a lot more to learn about it. There are a lot of factors which he identified, and some of them land use changes. What are the impacts as we see the land use changes happening? Rainfall. He went right back to what we heard very early from Dr. Seeley. We know we have more work to do. We have to look at some of these things and try to figure them out maybe a little more precisely. And of course, Larry just wrapped up with increased flow, turbidity, total suspended solids. We're seeing those increases. But he also mentioned something which I love hearing, especially from MPCA. We can do it with voluntary incentive-based conservation. I highly doubt we'll get there with regulation. Because as I look at the guy sitting back there from Stearns County, we can't give him enough staff to be sediment cops, or wetland cops, or manure cops. We'd have to put one at the end of every driveway, I suppose. And how many of you all drove 55 miles per hour the way here or followed the speed limit? I know I didn't. Okay, so that's what we heard, right? Let's just talk about some things that's making the papers maybe. There's been much debate recently about sources of sediment in Perry, Minnesota, waters. How much is coming from cropland? How much is coming from stream banks? How much is coming from bluffs and ravines? We saw some pretty good correlations here. We think we have a pretty good understanding. Given a landscape, it could be as high as 80–90% is coming from the bluffs and the stream banks, which tells me in that watershed, the uplands, the ag cropping that's going on, we're doing a good job. We're probably at the 10% mark. Another watershed, we might be at the 40% mark in the uplands with our ag practices, and the stream bank, rivers, bluffs might be contributing 60%. So we have a realm there. I think the other thing that these results show are some interesting findings, and maybe some that really don't surprise us as much. Findings that we thought maybe 20 or 25 years ago, they made sense, but sediment fingerprinting, particularly from the Minnesota River watershed, suggests that field source sediment are only that 10 to 40%. So the science is indicating those percentages are correct. This means we have to have a big shift in how we're thinking, right? We have to think much differently. And again, we have to be voicing much louder from the ag side that we may not be the problem that 99% of the voting population thinks we are. We are doing some things well. In light of the fact that 65% of the land in the Minnesota River is annually in row crops, and it's only contributing 10 to 40% of the sediments, we're doing a good job. USDA's assessment of NRCS programs bears this out. We had a SEEP report. Conservation effects for assessment of project showed 87% of the crop acres had a sediment loss of less than 2 tons per acre. When we think about soil loss, typically if you pick a map unit, which is one soil type, we think about 5 tons per acre per year is sustainable. Some cases 4 tons. When you talk about 2 tons, less than 2 tons, that's magnificent from a sheet and rill erosion standpoint. But it may not be magnificent from a water quality standpoint, depending on what that 2 tons of sediment is carrying and how well that receiving water body can handle it in the case of nitrogen or phosphorus. So again, as many of the previous presenters talked, we really have to dig into the details, and if we say something globally, we need to define it, and Dr. Sands said it very well. We have to be careful with what we ascertain to be reflective of the whole world. Rarely is it. Rarely is it. So all of this really sounds like in ag we're doing a really, really, really great job. But I'm not going to let the ag producers in the room, all you farmers that raise your hands, off the hook completely. In a watershed scale, runoff does matter. And if we're continuing to see what we heard from Dr. Seeley, these climate change that's happening to us, where we are going to be getting more and more of our rainfall in 1 or 2 or 3 events, we have a problem in that. And the problem is, it goes back to a pretty basic thing. If we can reduce the upland sediment load by any amount, we're going to be doing something very well, something that's needed. And we're going to do that by putting certain practices in the right place and in the right location. So they will work. Oftentimes when I'm at state tech committee meetings and I'm talking, I'll ask how many producers do we have in the room. I'll ask some basic questions. One of the things I like to think about is if we fly over your farm. Right now, if I flew over it today, what would I see? Good answer. Lots of water. But I'm going to try to do my anti-rain dance so it goes away.
Thank you.
I need to stop doing that. But beyond that, if I'm seeing corn and soybeans, sugar beets, row crops from fence row to fence row, are you part of the problem or are you part of the solution? I would argue you're part of the problem. And I will tell you why. It goes back to what Dr. Sands said. I think we need to go back to a basic concept that when Coon Creek started, Dr. Trimble talked about it, there was a magnificent emphasis to target every one of those landowners and to do this baseline data. And it was something where they actually did a play. And they talked about soil erosion, and it was a person that dressed up in a costume, and they did this play representing what was happening on the landscape. What the impact of that was that every landowner, every farmer really decided that, you know what, contour strip cropping maybe was a good thing to do. And what they did with the play was they targeted one or two of the key landowners, the leaders. I would argue some of the people in this room right now. You're here because you're an entrepreneur. You're probably a key leader in your ag community as a landowner, as a farmer. They targeted those folks and they got them to start doing the contour strip cropping. And it spread rapidly. And one of the basic concepts that we learned when we were the Soil Conservation Service was that the raindrop, if it falls on your field, it becomes yours. So the question is, what are you going to do with it? Do you keep it? Do you retain it? Do you have the crop residue absorb it? Do you have all these other practices? Or do you let it run off as rapidly as you can because you have too much water so that you can get your crop in the ground, or so that you can harvest your crop, all the right things that you want to do? What are you going to do with it? So we get back to the basics, and I think we get there quickly. I think there's something from a standpoint of a concept that every farmer in this room, if I could have you leave with one thing. We go through and we look at our budget. You all do this usually starting about December, January at the latest. You're starting to put out your budgets. What you're going to pay for seed corn, beans, all your inputs, diesel fuel. You lay out a budget. How many of you have a budget for conservation in that line? That's great. The challenge is don't make that budget a zero. Put a dollar amount in, especially right now. When I say we have to blow our horn and we have to speak loudly about what we're doing well, we really need to also, in this time of the economy where we have $7 corn, $14 beans, it looks like we're making money. The rest of the world thinks every farmer made money last year, although every farmer didn't. It appears like every farmer did. Let's put a line in there for conservation. The challenge I'll have to you as well is take that dollar amount, if it's $5,000 or $10,000, look at the programs we have and turn that $5,000 or $10,000 into 20 or 30 by participating in our programs. Then, I think we can do some things. Water and sediment control basins, Larry talked about. As we went on the tour yesterday, a couple of the folks that were with me, I would point out some spots where it was obvious that a water and sediment control basin in this spot would stop a lot of sediment from leaving the field. We need to do those. We need to put them in the right place, the right spot, at the right time. Those practices, I think, work effectively. They don't retire a lot of land, and they can help tremendously in sediment loads moving down through from the uplands eventually to our surface water bodies. Wetland restorations. One of the first things I did before I applied to be state conservationist in Minnesota was I did my homework. I had a list of advantages and disadvantages to becoming the state conservationist in Minnesota if they would select me. Guess what the number one disadvantage was? Swamp buster and wetlands. I knew that what was happening in Minnesota, what happened in Iowa in the 1970s, you guys want a tile. And unfortunately, or fortunately, we passed a bill in 1985 called Swamp Buster. And it's a provision where it says any wetlands that were there need to be protected from here on out. So how do we overcome this? Because we're not Iowa, we didn't tile, so most of our areas are not prior converted. Now we come into these commodity prices where you all want to. And we want to drain some of these areas so we can get an increase in yield for all the right reasons. If I were a farmer, and if I could increase my yield by 25%, I'd be tiling. especially if I know the tile will pay for itself in 1 or 2 years, which I think we all know it will on many fields. So how do we get there? Again, right practice, right time. If we're going to tile, and we are, it's happening right now, right across the state. Let's be smart enough in the ag world to put the water quality practices in at the same time. Let's look at drainage water management. Let's look at the bioreactors, the bark filters. Let's look at bringing some of the tile to surface. Let's look at taking a piece of ground, whether it be a WRP site where we have a restoration easement on and bring the tile to surface so we can run the water into it, or whether it's that 20 or 30 acre spot on the field which doesn't yield the best, whether or not you can get it tiled and be effective, maybe, maybe not. Let's restore it, put a wetland there, bring the tile to surface so we don't send the nitrogen and the other stuff in the tile water downstream. Right practice, right place, right time, it'll work. And I think we can do those. If we can do all of these things, we can go back to the basics in the uplands. I think then we can answer the question as to where agriculture fits in this big picture. A lot of the stuff we saw when it came to the rivers and the bluffs, I don't think we can ask producers. We don't have enough money to solve some of those problems. And I would argue we may not even have the right practices yet to solve those. But I think we can have some impact on slowing the water and the timing effect of when the water does eventually hit the river. By keeping that raindrop up on your farm as much as we can, knowing that this time of year, as wet as we are, we're going to send a percentage of it through our tile water and through our surface water. But given the right practices, we can do so in a way which we reduce the sediment load. We've also reduced any of the nitrogen or phosphorus that might be going with it. So, farmers, are we a part of the problem or are we part of the solution?
We are the solution.
Both. Yeah, we're both. One of the challenges I think is going to be, can we get these upland practices in place? And what impact will the upland practices have overall? That challenge comes right back to what all the other presenters said. Do not look at this globally. We have to get back to doing a conservation plan, sitting at your kitchen table, looking at your operation, and deciding what practices work. Some of you will do strip till because it works, because you're going to be farming for the next 20 or 30 years, and you're going to make the investment in equipment to do it. Some of you are going to keep the equipment you have, and you're going to make that work. Some of you will decide that it would be better to restore this 20 or 30 acres, put it into a wetland, outlet your tile in. Others will decide, I want to go with a bioreactor, I'll go with drainage water management. I don't want to retire that 20 or 30 acres. There isn't one system that I could give to all of you in this room and say, do this and it will work. It doesn't work that way. All of our staff, the folks that I work with, the Soil and Water Conservation District folks in the room, the Watershed District folks in the room know this. We have to customize that plan for your operation. So if we want to be part of the solution, what I need you all to do, one conservation practice a year. Start small. Do one practice a year. Do one 638. Do one grass waterway. Do one shallow wetland for restoration. Bring the tile to surface if it's an option. Put the bioreactor in. Challenge us, at least from the USDA standpoint, from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We're going to spend $20 million with EQIP, our Environmental Quality Incentive Program, probably next year. Spent 21 this year. The question, the challenge is, from you folks as farmers, are we spending the 21 million doing the right practices, the right place, the right time? So I believe we can be part of the solution. I think we could do a better job, but I think we need to start now, and the sooner the better. Thank you.
Thank you again, Don. It's been an excellent program. Before we depart, I want to thank the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council. Who do we have our council members who are here? Would you stand up? Soybean council members. Thank you. Minnesota Corn Research and Promotion Council, council members who are here, would you stand up? Thank you. I think money well invested. And Warren Formal, Warren, who are you? Let's give Warren a hand. He did a great job in putting together a program. Thank you all for coming. We're part of the solution in two ways. One, what we do individually, and the other, how we influence the policy decisions that are made in this important area that is important to society. So thank you very much. Drive safely on the way home. I hope it dries up, and I hope the weeds are killed, and have a good summer.